Bonjour, welcome to JCB Live. This is so exciting to live this wine style today with two irresistible ladies. This is today and this whole month, International Women's Month, International Ladies Month. My true inspiration from grandmothers, mother, sister, lovely wife. I'm surrounded with amazing ladies. And today we have Stephanie Putnam and Marnie Old. Winemaking to the finest, sommelier to the highest. So ladies, welcome to the live. And we're going to have such a great time together celebrating.
Just don't put that in my face.
Look at that. I'm always amazed that the people in the surrounding, after 1,000 bottles being opened on the show, are still protecting themselves. Are they afraid? Are they engaged? Are they excited? This is all about the energy. So, Marnie, welcome.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Stephanie, cheers.
Cheers.
Woohoo! So, Marnie, how does it feel today, this month, to be celebrated for the entire month?
I think it's pretty fabulous. And I don't know about anyone else in the business, but I just see in my career, I've seen such a change in the world of wine, which historically had been kind of a boys' club, if you know what I mean. Coming up, I know that, there probably were not as many female winemakers in Stephanie's classrooms as there were men, and certainly that was true for me coming up as a sommelier as well. But certainly in our two professions, on the winemaking side and on the sommelier side, we have seen significant strides towards parity or equity between men and women in this profession. And I think part of that is that women are really talented when it comes to sensory professions. This is one of them, and there's strengths and weaknesses on both sides, but there are gender differences in the way that people perceive sense of smell and taste. And I think that plays a role here.
Stephanie, what do you think about that?
Well, I would argue that every day is Women's Day. It doesn't just need to be a day or a month. I think every day of the year should be Women's Day. I would agree to a certain extent with what Marnie is saying in terms of you do see more women coming up into production or on the sommelier side. When I was at school, it was like maybe 25% female and the rest were clearly male. So it was very much a male-dominated industry. And is that because at the time people weren't realizing that you could make wine as a career? That could be part of it. It started off as an ag business. Women don't tend to go into ag business. But now it just takes one or two. Once you start seeing women in that role, then it gives all the younger girls along the way an inspiration to say, you know what, I would like to be a winemaker or a sommelier.
Yeah, it really opened this entire avenue as an inspiration. And who inspired you yourself? Were you inspired by ladies specifically, or just the idea of creating?
I think the idea of creating, because at the time there really weren't any female winemakers when I was going to school that I was truly aware of and looking up to. Now, there were women. I just wasn't necessarily aware of them and looking up to them because they weren't as publicized then as we are now. So I was looking internally for my own internal inspiration.
But the challenge in the actual winery physically was a little difficult at the beginning. Did you have to play shoulders and elbows and all that to get things going and being respected as a woman at first?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the reason I was hired at one of my first jobs was because I used to teach rock climbing. So he knew that I could do the physical aspects of the job.
So you would climb on top of the barrels?
I could do that. I could move the barrels. I could lift up the barrels. I could move the hoses. So the person who hired me actually was a former climber, so he knew that I could handle the physical aspects of the job. Now, definitely the guys in the cellar played tricks on me and tried to make the job sometimes not quite as easy as it should have been, but after a while I got the respect.
That's great. And what about you, Marnie, within the sommelier world and the restaurant world? Because we're talking more the physical, the operational. Then we'll go to the sensory, which I think is the most important, where ladies contribute the biggest in the world of sensory at large.
Hmm. Absolutely. I didn't have as many struggles. There weren't any guys in the cellar trying to make my job difficult. That certainly wasn't the case. But when I was coming up as a sommelier, I kind of had two things that made people not take me quite as seriously. One, I was a woman, but also I was extremely young. I was only 25 years old when I took my first fine dining sommelier position and was traveling to, for example, to big trade festivals in Europe. Like I remember going to Vin Italy, where I was there purchasing wine for my restaurant, and the Italian guys behind the counters didn't always take me seriously. My husband was behind me carrying my briefcase and just tasting along, and they would always address themselves to him rather than to me. But that's changed a lot over the years. And frankly, I have to say, being a woman was a huge asset to my career, because I don't think I would have gotten as much press attention. I don't think I would have gotten national level recognition quite as early as I did if I hadn't been a woman. So in many ways, I think that being a fresh flavor of the day, since it was uncommon at that time to have a female sommelier, definitely helped my career.
Yes, I would imagine it would. Not only in the theatrical side on the floor, with the charm, the understanding, the ability as well to listen, because ladies, you are great listeners. You listen to the grapes.
We listen to the grapes, we listen to the earth, we listen to the food.
That's right.
And I listen to the customers.
I love cooking. I'm a better baker than a cook because I have a sweet tooth, but yes.
Well, and baking is maybe arguably more challenging than just purely cooking too. So
more
it
precise.
Requires that level of precision. So Stephanie, why don't you give us a little bit of a description? We hear you typically on red wine, white wine. Give us your thoughts and your inspiration about those bubbles, again, to celebrate Women's Month.
Well, there's a certain amount of fresh yeast dough that's coming out. There's also a really pretty floral peach element that's coming out, like a white peach. So it's like a softer tone peach that's coming out.
Yeah. I'm with you. I love that white speech and not white speech, but almost white peach. And we are in the spring, and we're starting to have all those great senses out, which are really fresh and crisp. Very exciting. So on that note, Stephanie, give us your view on the ability of women in sensory and how that level of precision you ladies have to add another dimension to taste and flavor and aroma, and having this amazing, that I've witnessed with my own mother, memory bank. When you taste something, and I've tasted with you for now over 11 years, you have this amazing ability to remember. And same with you, Marnie. So do you want to...
Well, I think that food and wine is all about memories, and I think that women inherently do have more taste buds. That has been scientifically shown. But I also think that women tend to grow up in the kitchen, so that you learn at a young age to associate certain foods with smells and aromas and memories. And so you're just learning that at a much younger age. And you're also learning to trust that instinct that says, you know what, I am going to put a dash of salt in, and it's going to just kind of lift everything. So you learn to trust your instincts. You learn at a younger age to develop your palate. So it's environmental, and it's genetic and environmental at the same time.
Yes. So maybe, Marnie, on the genetic side, I've always thought, and maybe I'm biased because I was raised, again, with extraordinary ladies who were not necessarily winemakers, nor my mother, but I was always really impressed and dazzled and certainly amazed by the precision and the understanding of that specific flavor is stored somewhere and then it reappears and they allude to it. Marnie, would you want to further elaborate on that as well? Because you're a true sensory queen.
Well, and I do pay a lot of attention to sensory science. It's something that's always fascinated me. And of course, because of the way our world operates, being so visual, we have a lot more research into gender differences on sense of sight than we do on taste and smell. And what I find very interesting there is that there's a very distinctive difference in the types of cells in the eyes. For men, it's more focused on movement, and for women, it's more focused on color. And the speculation, of course, is that, one of these gender roles traditionally was doing more of the hunting, for example, and the other doing more of the gathering. So that for women, the difference in the shade of a fruit or a berry as it reaches ripeness was something that was very distinctively important to their role in the community. Whereas for men, it was more about spotting the rabbit or the elk, half a mile away. Now, what's lacking, unfortunately, is because what they call the chemical senses of smell and taste are nowhere near as intensely researched. There's been a lot of confusing studies over the last 50 years, some of which suggested that women have more acute sense of smell and taste, some of which have suggested that it's more equal. But what I find lacking in those studies is that they tend to, if you read the framing of the studies, the ones that really recognize a difference between men and the women are the ones that are recognizing a difference in the value judgment. So with men and women, we tend to have the ability on the sense of smell, for example, to detect a smell at similar levels, maybe a little bit stronger for women, but not by a lot. Where there is a huge difference, though, is in making a judgment about that smell, whether it's a positive, desirable smell or an unpleasant smell to be avoided. That is where the female judgment really stands out. And I think that that's a critical role for winemaking, as of course Stephanie needs to be sensitive not just to the positive smells that we want present in the wine, but of course to the negative ones that we want to avoid. So our greater sensitivity, and it's almost an emotional judgment about whether those things are pleasant or unpleasant in their, whereas for guys it's like, wow, the smell is there, and for women it's like, oh, I really like it or I really don't like it. It has more of a positive or negative value for us, and I think that that's a big part of it.
What's your view of that?
I would agree. Actually, I hadn't heard that explanation before, but I would completely agree. I mean, I think that for me, there are some things that I am very sensitive to, and I have a visceral reaction to that I don't like. Certain vegetal elements in Cabernet, but I also know, as part of your instinct or education over time, is that a little bit of that savory element will actually give your wine a little bit more complexity.
That's right. Stephanie, as we taste a lot together, and maybe we can obviously go to one of our favorites, the St. Helena, dear friends. Tell us, how much do you actually need to taste versus smell? Dear friends, we've been making fragrance now for some years and beautiful candles, and we're very fortunate to deal with some of the finest nose in the world. And Olivia Giacobetti is one where we often say, we just need to smell. Taste is only 20%. 80% of winemaking is the nose. And Stephanie and I, when we taste, and we're going to have a demonstration of that in the next few weeks for all of you with our friend Philippe Melka, we smell, we smell, we smell. And we, yes, taste, but not as much. How important is the nose for you? And give us maybe your thought process on how you hierarchize your approach as far as smelling.
Well, I mean, smelling is a leading indicator of a wine, and most people have first impressions of a wine. So if the aromatics aren't there, regardless of how it tastes, people are already going to have a judgment on it, and they're going to say, tastes really nice, it's silky, but the aromatics weren't there. So it's the first impression that people have on wine. So it's hugely important.
And how do you do it? So walk us through, and I think, Marnie, it would be wonderful if you could do the same after Stephanie. So explain to everyone how you analytically dive into the wine.
Well, I'm not sure if I can explain that because it's such an instinctual thing. I mean, of course, swirling helps, volatilize the aromatics. That's very important. A lot of times what I will do is I will smell the wine without stirring just to see what comes out, what's lifted out naturally. Yep. So I'll take a smell and then kind of just let it linger in my nasal passage. I was getting a lot of like blackberry fruit, and then I'm going to smell it, or swirl it, and then smell it again.
And do you go by family? Because often I go by family. So I go into my garden, I go into my fruits, I go into my more intense flavor,
Sure.
and then I go into my secondary and then my tertiary. Do you systematically have the same process, or you just overall and then more precisely dive in?
Overall, I don't necessarily,
Yes.
a lot of times, like, okay, that's really fruity or really savory. Let me distill it down from there. But I don't have, like, a lot of master wines have a very distinct
Yes.
chart, and I would probably benefit from that. But I don't necessarily go
Yeah.
down that chart of what do I smell, what do I taste. For me, it's what's my first impression? It's fruit. All right. Is it warm fruit? Is it cooler climate? Is it more acidic? And so I'll but it's all very rapid. You're not smelling the glass and then 5 minutes later coming up with it. It's very immediate.
That's right. What about you, Marnie, as Stephanie is explaining us that? Because, Marnie, it would be great to have your perspective and maybe quickly to touch on the spectrum of style. Because as far as I'm concerned, specifically when I taste with Stephanie, and we make a new wine, or we define a new wine, I go by adjective, as you know. I think about the idea. So the wines I love to make with Stephanie are the savage, the feline, because the inspiration she gives me, that's why I wore my leopard today. That
I bring out the
beautiful
animal
hair.
too.
Yeah, she brings the leopard, the tiger, the snake, the crocs, the zebra. So when we meet together, I often start, as you know, with the feeling and the description, and then we do this. So it's two different approach, and then two double entries. So that's why we need so many tasting to narrow it down then to define the wines. So Marnie, I was just giving you that overall to give you a larger canvas.
Well, and my approach tends to be a bit more rudimentary because my history and my career is in teaching at the very basic level folks who are not professional wine tasters how to go about tasting. And really the most fundamental thing that you need to do is to start by dividing your senses one at a time. Look at sight separately from smell, separately from taste, separately from texture. And I think the biggest stumbling block, or one of the biggest ones for beginners, is not realizing that when you taste something, this wine for instance, the flavors, the things that your brain registers as taste, are almost always olfactory, in the sense that they are not detected by the taste buds. Your taste buds on your tongue are extraordinarily rudimentary. There are only 6 things they can detect, of which only 2 are significantly present in wine: sweetness and acidity. Everything else that we detect in wine, everything you think you know the taste of, from your coffee in the morning to raspberry jam on your toast to smoked salmon for lunch, those flavors that we recognize are not really detected by your taste buds. They are olfactory. We get a preview of them when we swirl and sniff the wine, as Stephanie was demonstrating. But when you go to take them into the mouth, what happens is that the wine, in contact with your body heat through the tongue, the soft palate, reaches a higher temperature, which drives more evaporation, and more of the volatile flavor components, the esters, the aldehydes, the fusel oils, leave liquid and move into gas form and rise up the retronasal passage to be perceived as flavor from the inside passage. So we call it odor, fragrance, aroma, scent when we perceive it from the exterior, but that same message, when it arrives through the back door from the back of the mouth, we call it flavor. And that, when we connect it to the spectrum of style, to me, red wines in the spectrum of style are largely driven by ripeness. So the more elegant wines tend to have more of those cool climate fruit characteristics that Stephanie was talking about, more of the red fruit, red berries, tart flavors like cranberry, pomegranate, raspberry, strawberry. Whereas as we move into sensuous and powerful wines, we are really moving more into the realm of darker fruit, black cherry, black plum, black berry, black currant. Those kinds of flavors require more sunshine and warmth in the vineyard to develop in the grapes and then be transmitted in the wine. And then to me, that difference between sensuous and powerful is more of a winemaking difference, where with the sensuous wines, we're trying to make the wines for instant gratification, softening the acidity and the tannin in the blend, for example, harmonizing the flavors so that they don't need food. Whereas the more powerful styles, the classic, the cellar-worthy steakhouse wines, for instance, those are wines where we are supporting them, giving their structural components like the antioxidant tannins and acidity. We're boosting those so that the wine has the ability to resist oxidative decline over time in the cellar. And those characteristics give a kind of support framework that preserves the freshness of that fruit for 5, 10, 20 years longer than you would have had happen in the softer, more easy drinking blend.
Wow. Ooh la la!
Wow, that was a great explanation.
Yeah, that was wonderful, Marnie. So, Stephanie, it would be great as we're tasting this beautiful San Elena that we have another toast, of course, to Women's Month, to you and your great talent, because, dear friends, I'm very fortunate, and I say we, of course, but I as well, because I learn from those ladies all the time and genuinely learn, and that's what I have fun with in life. It's exciting, because if you come into any tasting by thinking you already know, it's not as fun. I think life ought to be a constant discovery of oneself and learning from others. So, Stephanie, you taught me a great deal with this San Elena. I've always loved Rutherford, being a huge fan of Rutherford. But Stephanie showed me the sensuality, the emotional finesse, the eloquence, and the femininity with power of this wine. So, Stephanie, I'd love for you to describe to all of us how, in 2009, at the end of 2009 together, when we met and we decided to transform Raymond together, and for you to lead this incredible evolution, how you decided to do it, what were your terms that you used, and why this wine is so essential into demonstrating the future of Napa Valley wine style.
Wow, that's like 50 questions in
Yes.
one. I'm not quite sure if I can answer all of them. But when I came to you, and we talked about me starting at Raymond, there was an emotional connection that I had with Raymond. And I think I explained that to you, that in my early days, I had worked at another place that competed with Raymond. And so I think in order to really help elevate a winery or a wine quality, it's not just an intellectual exercise, because without the emotion, you're not going to care. You're not going to care about that next level of quality. So having that emotional connection, I think, is really vital to not only improving the wine, but also helping lead the team. Because if they see how invested you are, they're also going to come in along the way. I mean, there were some qualitative things that we did at the winery in terms of berry sorting and producing wines that are unfiltered to really help preserve the wine's inherent fruit and structure. But really, for me, it was about making that emotional connection with the wine and the winery and the people.
And the new wine style, though, for Napa Valley. Because remember, dear friends, when we talk about Women's Day, we talk about something delicate, sophisticated, refined, that are women. We defined in 2010 a new style of wine that was not just about alcohol and tannins, but was about, in many ways,
it was power and velvet together, power and finesse, power and silk. It was really yin and yang. You can have both feminine and masculine attributes in a wine. You can have that power and the structure that you want for ageability, but it's really important to balance out that power with some velvet so it's more approachable, or it's silky. So it was really more about balancing things out.
That's right. Which is, dear friend, very important, because when you put things in the context, Marnie, don't you think pre-2010, Napa Valley was known for, at least in the world, one style of wine, which was attached to maybe the critiques that encouraged that style of wine. Don't you think it has evolved a great deal, and Raymond has been leading in that?
Absolutely. And this is something that we see throughout the New World regions that didn't inherit centuries of tradition in their style profile like Burgundy did, for example. what tended to happen was that throughout the 20th century, there was kind of an obsession with shoehorning as much flavor as you possibly could into the bottle in Napa Valley without really aiming for finesse, without aiming for food orientation, without aiming for balance, without aiming for that softness, that lusciousness, the velvety property that Stephanie is talking about. But the challenge there is just because you can get that much power and flavor into the wine doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be an enjoyable experience for everyone who pulls the cork to savor the wine. And so what I've seen recently, more often in the last, decade or two, has been, it's like the pendulum was swinging too far, and now it's beginning to come back to earth, and we are beginning to see more diversification of style between different properties in Napa Valley, between different sub-districts of Napa Valley. But a large part of that, I think, is a rediscovery of the confidence in the new world. The original drive to make the wines overly intense, I think, was inherently a kind of newcomer's insecurity, like I need to prove I can get this power, right? Mm-hmm. But once you have the power, you need to learn to wield it wisely, which is, exactly what Stephanie does in the cellars at Raymond, and that we so appreciate in her wines, is that you get power, but you don't get clobbered over the head with it. You get this balance, you get this understatement, you get this subtlety that somehow can coexist with this intensity and give you a more desirable result. And that's really what I see happening nowadays in Napa.
I'm so excited to hear. Well, we could continue this discussion, ladies, for hours and days and weeks and months. And we have for 11 years.
We have.
And together, Marnie, for so many years. And lady, I really want to thank you for elevating the world we live in, for genuinely being, so phenomenal at influencing without, forcing, but that subtle influence is making an enormous leap forward in Napa Valley, in Sonoma, at large, in the world of wine. So, dear friends, as you enjoy this amazing Raymond St. Helena as an example, it could be the same for the Rutherford, the Calistoga, the 13th district, and generations. I really want to thank our ladies, Marnie, for having been on stage in the theater of the restaurant, today being Vinlightment.
Yes.
You see, even I stumble on this one. This is so cool. And Stephanie for being such an incredible, passionate, talented inspiration and leader who's taught me everything I know, which is very small still, about Cabernet, and today loving it. Not that she cannot make many other wines, because she does, but I think as ladies, for really bringing Napa Valley to the next level and the wine world to the next level. I say that humbly because when I started at 5 years old in the wine world, it's very true. Besides my mother walking the cellar, there was only men, specifically in the winery, in the tasting room. And the ladies were mainly organized in the office and keeping things well put together. And then suddenly we saw gradually a rapid evolution of women in the wine world today leading. I want to acknowledge all the ladies in our organization because we have over 65% women.
Yes!
Woo! We have a lot of women in key leadership at all levels of the organizational chart. And I want to raise my glass to all our Wine Society, Joie de Vie collector members, and all our ambassadors, because we have over 85% ladies ambassadors.
Wow.
And this is your month, but this is your century. More importantly, I would not limit it to your month. I'm surrounded with women. Luckily, I'm a better man thanks to that. There's still a long way to go. But I want to raise my glass to all of you ladies in the world for making the wine world a better place.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And hopefully we are inspiring a few young girls to want to become winemakers like Stephanie or see a future as a sommelier.